Welcome to Threading Founders, the podcast that uses disruptive AI technology to find patterns between successful entrepreneurs and side hustlers so you can apply those insights into your ventures. I'm your host, Anthony Lobosco. In this episode, I'm going to talk to Kent Martin. Kent is not only a dear friend, but a brilliant serial entrepreneur. He started his career in finance, pivoted to a startup in the defense industry, and then he founded and co-founded a myriad of businesses, including a few with one of my previous guests, Matt Bombison. Today, Kent is president and global marketing director at Contour, but he is always involved in a project that's on the brink of changing the world. Maybe I'm exaggerating, but something really interesting. He's a mentor to many aspiring and seasoned entrepreneurs, and today we're going to talk to Kent about his entrepreneurial journey and some lessons he's learned along the way. This is the first of a 2-episode series, so stay tuned for part 2 next week, because with the help of AI, we're going to analyze our discussion so we can find out what makes Kent great. And if you like this discussion and think someone else would too, hit that subscribe button so you can get our latest episodes. Thank you, and enjoy the conversation with Kent.
Welcome to Threading Founders, the podcast that uses AI to find patterns between successful entrepreneurs and side hustlers, so you can use these insights into your ventures. Sit back, take notes, and enjoy the show with your host, Anthony Lobosco.
Kent, what is up, my friend? Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Happy to do it, sir.
All good?
All is well. How about you?
Everything is very good, thank you.
I know with that introduction, I was wondering who the heck you were talking about. I kept looking around.
I knew. I know, on the brink of changing the world. I know it's a little bit, but I like to embellish. I like to talk big.
Well done.
And we have to attract viewers. We have to attract listeners, though. So let's set the stage here. I'm going to ask a few questions about your journey, about your background. But before, I think it's important for people to understand that you were obviously in finance before. Not obviously, I know that, you know that. But before you got into entrepreneurship, what were you doing in finance?
Well, I was working for a mutual fund company. It was called AIM at the time. Then it kind of merged, and it's successive now to it's called Invesco. And specifically what I was doing, I was an economics major coming out of college, and what I ended up doing is kind of being a quant for the marketing department, which ended up actually being a very good thing that gave me a great experience base for the rest of my career, in that all the sales guys would come up with these ideas of how do you basically translate the fund performance or what the fund does into something that the brokers would sell to their customers. So I would be the one who would come up with what kinds of stories can the numbers tell you about the fund's performance or the general economic conditions, and why that fund was then applicable to that particular set of time. So it was a very interesting and creative way to be able to understand how to tell a story, specifically about money, and how to learn the narratives that attract attention and then attract money into your specific thing you're trying to sell.
Yeah, that's quite the skill and quite the. That's something you obviously have carried throughout your career for being an entrepreneur as well. Just to have a sense of when that was. When was that?
Mid late 90s. So I think I started in 96.5 with them, 5.6, and then I left in 2000. So just before the .com crash, got out. So it was a really interesting time to be in finance, because everything was really go-go, everything was going up, the market was hot, the NASDAQ was going crazy, And it was a fun time to be trying to learn from a lot of really good folks. I got very lucky early in my career that I was mentored by a lot of really smart and talented folks, and gave me a nice base to be able to translate that into raising money for different startups and getting into basically a way to sell through numbers.
Wow, what a foundation. I mean, so I guess it's the question I have for you is, why did you go in the direction of entrepreneurship? And what was next after that? What was the, kind of the direction that you went in?
Well, I was working with a guy at AIM who was, I was basically doing support stuff for him. So as he was coming up with ways to sell mutual funds, I would go do the research and come up with different strategies to help him create these presentations. He was one of the national speakers for AIM at the time. And he was also an angel investor in a company that had just started up that was doing mine-resistant vehicles. And it was based on a South African design set of principles. And it just had come into the U.S. And he, being a really, really great salesman, convinced me that becoming a wholesaler for the mutual fund company and doing continuing my career over there was a really bad idea. And being the seventh employee and the first director of marketing and finance for $35,000 a year was a really good idea. So 2000, I up and jumped from Houston and went to Charleston, South Carolina, and was one of the first employees and kind of one of the first people, basically kind of representing him in his investment in what became a very, very good, kind of cool company, which did a lot of good in the product that it had. It saved a lot of lives as the global war on terror kind of went in Iraq and Afghanistan. But it also gave me a really cool base of understanding things like, how do you make payroll when money's super tight and you have 30 employees that are working for you to try and get hard vehicles out, and you need more steel to make these things. So this company was called at the time Technical Solutions Group, and it ended up being renamed Force Protection. So it created the first set of vehicles that had the V-shaped hulls. So when a blast comes up from an IED or a landmine, it directs it basically away. So we were the very first company in the U.S. that did that. Ended up becoming a $4 billion program of record for the military, and it was fast-tracked as, basically IEDs became the biggest single killer of U.S. servicemen, a few years later. So it was a very interesting switch. Really got my feet wet very, very quickly. There's a theoretical way that you learn how to read a balance sheet and read financial statements, and it makes a hell of a lot more difference when it's your own, and you have to really understand what the implications of all the various pieces and how everything works together, and you've got to figure out how to make a payroll. So it was a great experience for me.
That's great. It's really interesting when I speak with serial entrepreneurs like yourself. That's pretty much like the most linear part of the story is, how you made that, how you started, how you made that move into entrepreneurship. And then from there, it just kind of probably goes like that. How many businesses would you say that you had gotten into after?
I should have a exact number on the tip of my tongue, but either being, super early in or founding myself 7, 8, something like that, 9, including some smaller side kind of gigs.
Wow.
I'm a sucker for a good idea.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In your experience, what would you say the pros and cons of being an entrepreneur are?
There's an awful lot of both. As a general rule, the highs are much higher and the lows are much lower. When it's your baby, particularly, it's a series of emotional ups and downs that as I've gotten older and as I've done it more and more, I've realized you have to kind of take the moments to celebrate that sometimes you don't because you're more worried about what's the next down step or, when's the other shoe going to drop. And then when things do get tight, you have to realize that you've got to keep pushing and your persistence is eventually going to pay off. But you have to temper that with the idea that sometimes, at a certain point, it is actually better to be a good shepherd of the money that you've been entrusted, particularly if you've raised money, from other folks. And sometimes you've got to make a graceful exit when something just isn't working. And it's really tough to know the difference. I know I certainly went through a stage where I figured the harder I push and I can outwork any problem and I can just make things happen. And that was not always the case. And, you end up in situations sometimes where you just can't work your way out of something.
Well, that brings me to my next question, and I'm glad you brought that up. What would you say the most challenging aspect of your journey what has been? I know there are many challenges, but what would you say one of the most challenges that you faced, and how did you overcome it?
Well, probably the biggest single hit I took was second vehicle company. I ended up helping. The first one ended up getting eventually taken out by General Dynamics. We started up a second one that I helped raise. Well, I basically raised all the money for, about $19 million. And the first company ended up suing the second company. We had some operational things where we weren't getting the vehicles out fast enough for the government, and the first company essentially did strategically, in retrospect, a good move because we had similar, basically the same suppliers, and they forced us into bankruptcy by leveraging the suppliers, and that blew up absolutely everything. It was a complete mess, and I had to tell a lot of people that trusted me, with directing their investments into this company, that the money was gone, and that was a terrible, terrible thing, something I never want to have to do again. And it was, it took a long time to basically come out of that on the other side, to be able to get back into, hey, another idea is coming down the pike. Let's get back on the horse and figure out how to do this and be comfortable back in that situation again. Luckily I ended up being able to fall into another couple of positions, working as an investment banker for a little while, and then doing some other things, digital marketing and some other companies that allowed me to kind of get back and comfortable again. But that was a hard experience.
I think absolutely. And I think that when you and I spoke about this previously, overcoming something like this, right? Obviously you talked about, getting into investment banking and some other things as well. But during that process, before you actually started to, move on a little bit and do some other things, what did you do? I think when we spoke, maybe, you do martial arts, you had maybe spent some time getting your head clear. I'm sure was there a time period that you had to really focus on getting your mind all straight? Yeah,
and doing some physical activities was certainly huge. And luckily, a friend of mine picked me up when all that was happening. He was actually our investment banker for the end part of the second company, and he had an open slot, so I ended up going to work for him. And
got it. Yeah,
that was really helpful because it allowed me to just focus on strictly doing that as a job and being able to not have the weight of other people, basically being a principal and just being able to execute as an employee. So that helped, along with just basically kind of moving on with life. getting back into was when I moved back to Houston. I was doing martial arts an awful lot, and that basically mental or physical exhaustion is the greatest antidote to mental exhaustion. So whenever you're either in a really bad place mentally, if you go out and run yourself till you're puking, your brain is going to feel better and thank you for it later.
Yeah.
So, if you're in that kind of a spot, I can highly recommend, getting into some sort of whatever floats your boat in terms of exercise types or, activities. And if you throw yourself into that, the rest of life will kind of even out, and it'll help you get past annoying times like those.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. That's great advice. What would you say your biggest achievement as an entrepreneur?
Well, realistically, it would be working with that first company and being able to say that, one of the things that we had in the actual manufacturing floor itself was pictures of some guys who survived blasts. And I thought that was one of the more directly linking what you're doing for your daily job into why this is actually a good thing, right? Why?
Oh yeah, you're seeing how that's affecting people.
And doing your job makes a difference. And, understanding that these vehicles really saved a lot of lives. And, I think before the MRAP started going out, and it was just it was before MRAP was even the name. It was Buffaloes and Cougars. It was something like 70 or 80% of all the casualties that we were taking were strictly from IEDs, vehicles getting blown up. And that reduced the addition of these MRAPs, reduced that tremendously. And, people were able to walk away from blasts that you just couldn't before. And so if I really look at things, that was one of the most dramatic, there is a reason for doing good in this business and trying to get this business up and running, and all the heartache that and effort that it took to really get that, because we started that. Garth Barrett was the guy who bought this technology over, and he was the founder. And I remember sitting in different meetings with some generals from the Army, and this is just after 9/11, and they're saying, well, we don't need any of these vehicles. We as an Army know where these minefields are, and we just go around them, and so we'll never have this as a problem. And Garth knew better. He was coming from a different type of experience, and understanding and being able to bring this technology at a really good time that was before the problem manifested itself. We were there with a solution, so the timing was really fortunate.
Yeah.
And we were able to bring that into being, and it ended up being a huge thing. I mean, you probably still see the vehicles are now actually all over U.S. cities because they were donated to SWAT teams and police teams after they were coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. So it's still fun to see for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm sure they absolutely appreciate it too. Instead of really talking about like some other businesses that you had gotten into, which I think is so fascinating, I think lessons learned. I want to pivot to that because, one of the lessons that you kind of talked about indirectly is that really surrounding yourself with great people, right? I mean, especially when you're down, maybe when you're up and things like that. If you can talk just a little bit about your circle of, your circle that you have, that's really helped you.
Sure. Like I said, when I was coming into this whole thing, I didn't have a grand idea that I wanted to be an entrepreneur or anything. I just kind of fell into it. A dear friend of mine, a mentor of mine, was the one who pushed me into that direction with that first vehicle company. And, he's kind of the epitome of entrepreneur, and to the point where he says it's really kicked him in the butt many times. He's not really sure if for being a financial professional for all of these years, whether or not his risk tolerance is a little off the charts. but he's a great example of getting into the fact that the people that you surround yourself with, if they're all really smart and they're driven and they're doing good things, that helps you go in the similar directions. I certainly wouldn't say I'm nearly as smart as some of them or as driven or anything else, but it certainly inspires me and helps me get into fun situations because I enjoy working with them. And, certainly from that perspective, one of the things that we learned in different earlier companies was we wanted a no asshole policy. So sometimes you're forced to deal with people you don't like. And as you kind of progress in your career and as you progress in where you are with some of these companies, only try and deal with the people that you like and respect and you want to be in the trenches with. Because everything, particularly when you're talking about doing startups or small companies or, really fighting, it's you're in the trenches. Your partners are your, marriages to some extent.
Yeah.
You have to really enjoy your fellow workers because you're going to be talking, 8-hour days don't really exist, and you're going to be talking on the phone with them way after and, socializing with them often too.
Well, I think what's important too is that you guys all surround yourself with people, like you talked about Steve being a different personality than you. And, the fact that he's so close with you and you're close with him too, you're kind of like a yin and yang, right? I mean, he may go in one direction and then you may try. I'm not saying you're going to pull him back, but you know what I mean? You're going to maybe offset some of his, and rightfully so with him too, with you, right? So I think that yin and yang is important. And I think that really the integrity overall is good.
You want to find other folks that complement your skill sets.
Right.
So, Matt and I have always made a really great team because we didn't do the same exact things well. And it's really kind of funny because he's one of those super intelligent engineer types that actually can get in front of people and can be an excellent marketing person and have a rapport with customers. And he's one of those very few ones, but he doesn't always necessarily like to do it and feel that that's his best thing to do. I'm, in general, I don't really code or anything like that, but I'm very technologically aware, at least in the very high strokes. But
so he's got you. He's got you to do that, right? Yeah.
Where, he may be happier in the back end, doing the technological breakthroughs and having that kind of fun. So, the complementary skills, that's important.
Yeah. What about some other lessons that you've learned along the way?
Number one thing is when you're up, and that's great. Realize there's going to be a down. And when you're down, almost more importantly, things are going to turn up eventually. And it's really about perseverance. And it's really about understanding, hey, the more planning that you do doesn't necessarily mean that things are going to turn out anywhere near that you had projected, but the more you think about something, the more prepared you will be for the twists and turns that come later. One of the greatest terms I heard is, in this particular case, it was a battle plan, but it still works for a business plan. And the very last statement should always be, when all else fails, improvise. Because the classic phrase is, no battle plan ever survived the first shots. And that allows it to survive, right? When all else fails, improvise. And the same thing happens for a business plan. When you can try and make the rosiest projections, you can try and be as cautious as you can try and mitigate every risk factor that you can think of. But at the end of the day, until you get into the market and you're starting to swing with everybody else, you really don't know what's going to happen. And things come out of left field, and money goes out the weird ways, and competition jumps, and technology changes. But what you've got to do is basically just keep on your toes and improvise and plan the best you can, because, preparedness makes its own luck.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Would you say that you're a person that stays in the middle, like instead of like trying to mitigate your highs and your lows? Or I guess like from what I heard, like in the beginning, that was probably something that you struggled with. Have you gotten better at that?
Yeah, I mean, certainly it's as you've been in doing the same sets of stuff and running into the same, not necessarily the same exact problems, but similar types of situations, you realize, all right, it's just another day at the office, right? So, it's not as big. And what I've certainly found, and I think it's typical more of a lot of entrepreneurs in general, is you have to take the time more to, well, certainly a lot of the ones who've come through bad times, you're more worried about the lows than you are about celebrating the highs. And one of the things that you really have to do is make sure that you understand and take a moment to acknowledge, or at least appreciate, when the first set of stuff goes right. So when you have those little milestone moments, the first time that you have the cash register ring, that's
Right.
a moment that you actually have to say, hey, I've actually created something of value that someone else is willing to give me their hard-earned money for. That's a moment that you have to appreciate. Whenever you get a good customer, or whenever you've solved a good problem, these are things that you've got to sit back and, I'm not saying, start lighting cigars with $100 bills on fire, but what you've got to do is, appreciate that, because the bad times are coming around too. And if you focus on that too much, it takes away some of the fun.
Totally.
So for me at this point, it's just a lot of, experience that said, okay, I'm really not worried about it. I've seen most, like when I was in my fighting days, I was getting in the ring with a guy, and my coach had said, look, this guy is nothing compared to your sparring partners who are world champions. You're not going to get hit with anything that you haven't at least seen before. So it's the same basic idea.
Right.
I'm going to, if the new companies I'm looking at or whatever going off, there's nothing in general that I haven't seen before. So it doesn't mean you're going to get floored, but,
right. But that's, like you said, your coach is there, so it's important to have good people around you, and you're not on an island is 100%. The key, right? And that's I think that all kind of comes around too. So, yep. Yeah, that's great. That's really,
and for me particularly, I've been involved with a lot of the same cast of characters for the different companies. So one of us gets a good idea, we all kind of pitch in and go execute it. And sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. But
you guys try and play devil's advocate on why this won't work.
Yeah,
and things like that.
If you look at, and you say that between the 3 or 4 of us, we've done 6, 7, 8 together. We've probably looked at 3,000 or 4,000 ideas that we've teared apart. We'd sit there and basically pitch ideas in these sessions, and everyone else's job is to tear the ever-living crap out of these ideas. Yeah. And that's the only way that it becomes stronger. So the only thing you move forward with is something that no one's been able to sit and very intelligent people trying to tear it apart. And when they finally all say, all right, we've tweaked this thing enough that we don't see the problem, then sometimes that means that's when you get scared. But
yeah,
you try and rip it apart.
That is
if
phenomenal advice.
You kind of move forward with after, but you've got to make sure you don't have an ego if you're going to these sessions too, because
right.
You've got friends of yours who you respect, and they are literally trying to find every black swan event. What happens if asteroids come down and aliens, all this is coming down, But you've got to be able to say, I've got at least an answer why these things are, not to worry. So
nice, good stuff. So what do you have planned for this year, for 2024?
Well, the company I'm involved with now, Contour, which has been a great experience for me. I came into it kind of sideways out of the defense world, and we do ground penetrating radar. But the surveying industry, which I knew nothing about before I got into this, is really fascinating on both because of the technology that's coming in, like ours now, which for the longest time it was a very cautious, well, it's still a cautious industry. You don't want guys building bridges with, too many new ideas.
Right, yeah.
But technology now is really creating an advantage inside of the industry from all different kinds of things. So we're happy to be in this position where, in this one particular sensor, which is ground penetrating radar, we're certainly at a market leader, and the entire industry is moving in really interesting ways. And one of the things I'm trying to help with is putting different people together who are coming up with different ways that technology can help the industry as a whole. So if you haven't seen it yet, check out surveyhub.ai. It's one of the cooler little platforms inside of there that Contour is sponsoring. And
surveyhub.ai.
Surveyhub.ai. And
cool.
That's a fun thing. Matt may or may not be slightly involved, and as of potentially I am. But so any industry that's moving and has a lot of talented people in it, to me, is inherently interesting, and technology can be a very good disruptive factor in changing the way that optimizes the future, basically, and allows
it can be
to do things more efficiently and better. And
it can be overwhelming to find out the right solution as well, which is what you're saying as well.
Yeah, and sometimes getting back to the basics of what certain things, like essentially more efficient marketplaces, more efficient exchanges of information. That's what, call it the internet, but computing basically has made a lot easier and more efficient. But it's coming back to a concept that's been going on really since the Sumerians, or if down in the Buttonwood Tree that Wall Street, right? It's open outcry, exchanging information about different markets, and you've got technology that can exchange information in a better way from everything about a market, from pricing and putting two companies together. But it's anything that basically has two or more players in it, inside of a game, if you want to call it that. The way that those players can interact more efficiently because of technology is just really cool. And in this particular case, the survey industry is benefiting because a lot of these things, between information from sensors that can get down to a design group to make sure that your road is better, right?
Yeah.
Your bridge doesn't fall down. Where archaeologists can dig to the right spots or see whatever's there. So all of this is changing rapidly, and it's exciting to be a part of it.
Awesome. How can people reach you, Kent? What's the best way for people to reach out to you?
Easiest thing, I'm on LinkedIn, so happy to chat with anybody about almost anything. So if you want to reach out to me. Excellent.
So you'll see his LinkedIn on this video, and reach out to Kent. I'll have that also on our site as well. And Kent, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it. It was a great discussion, and we're just grateful to have you.
Excellent. Well, pleasure, Tony. Anytime you need anything, just let me know.
Thanks, man. Welcome to Threading Founders, the podcast that uses disruptive AI technology to find patterns between successful entrepreneurs and side hustlers so you can apply those insights into your ventures. I'm your host, Anthony Lobosco. In this episode, I'm going to talk to Ken Martin. Ken is not only a dear friend, but a brilliant serial entrepreneur. He started his career in finance, pivoted to a startup in the defense industry, and then he founded and co-founded a myriad of businesses, including a few with one of my previous guests, Matt Bombas.